This year's crop of rookie edge rushers might not have a Myles Garrett or a Chase Young or a Von Miller level prospect, but still, overall, it might be one of, if not the deepest edge class we have ever seen. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to post my pre-draft position rankings for the edge position because, quite frankly, I ran out of time. Those episodes took a lot longer to produce than I expected, but I still at least want to note where I had these guys slated kind of before the draft back in April, so I'm putting all of the tier list on screen right now, and I'm going to have that in a comment down below. But specifically for today, I kind of want to condense it to a list of 5 names, and these are going to be the 5 rookie edge rushers that I think are going to have the most success. And this is not just because I had the highest pre-draft grade on them, but also based on where they ended up in the league, because system fit and coaching fit obviously matters. So with all that exposition out of the way, I'm not going to waste any more of your time. We're going to dive right into it and get to number 5 on this list. The first thing that you need to know about Boya Maefe is he is an incredible athlete. 6'3", 260, 38-inch vert, over 10 foot in the broad, sub 4 640, but what's really important is that he has a 1.56 10-yard split, which is absolutely absurd. He is just one of the most athletic edge prospects, not just in this class, but in any class. I had him graded as a first-round prospect for a reason, and it's because as long as he gets molded by a good coaching staff, somebody with his physical tools should be a top-tier pass rusher in the league within a couple years. Right now, the Seahawks list him as a linebacker and not a down defensive end, which makes sense because I think in their system, his best spot is going to be Sam linebacker in base packages, and then in nickel, he'll essentially be a defensive end, but from a 2-point stance where, again, he is most comfortable. He's not super experienced in coverage, but to be perfectly honest, he's not really going to be asked to do anything other than just buzzing out as a curl flat player, or maybe being a hook dropper in certain zone pressures at the absolute most. So I'm not too worried about him having to cover and, match up with receivers down the field. 90% of the time, he's going to be going forward, not backwards. But when he is going forward, he has the talent to be a complete menace. Again, he's 6'3", 260 with a wicked first step, which is a combination you don't see very often. There's tons of power there, and he's got good natural bend that could get even better once he refines his technique a little bit more and learns how to link his feet and his hands together. He's a little bit more athlete than technician right now, but the athleticism is really jaw-dropping. As I mentioned, he doesn't really have every club in his bag, and his variety of pass rush moves is not really a variety at all. He has a chop move that he uses to win outside, and then he'll go speed to power with a long arm and just kind of run through people because he can. But again, considering that he's still really young, that's kind of fairly normal to me. He just hasn't really been around and had a whole lot of reps in order to refine his skill set. Honestly though, the main reason why I have Maefe this high, even though a lot of guys were drafted ahead of him, is that he's going to be molded by Clint Hurt, who's the Seahawks defensive coordinator and one of the very best defensive line and outside linebackers coaches in the NFL. Hurt has always done an excellent job of, for lack of a better term, making chicken salad out of chicken shit, both in Seattle and before that in Chicago, where he was the outside linebackers coach for Leonard Floyd when he was a rookie. And Floyd, if you'll remember, had a very productive first year in the league, even while missing a big chunk of his first season to injury. Maefe is even more talented than Floyd was, and that's saying a lot because Floyd was pretty talented himself. Again, I had a first-round grade on him for a reason, and I think it's perfectly acceptable to expect Clint Hurt, for as good a coach he is, to turn Maefe into a monster within a few years. Now, we're going to get to number 4 on this list, or rather the 2 players that I have tied at number 4, because I'm insanely greedy. We're going to get to them in just a second, but first, I want to thank our sponsor for this week, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is an at-home recipe service that will send you farm-to-table ingredients and all of the instructions on how to cook them right to your door. Obviously, there are tons of different meal options to pick from every week to fit virtually any diet out there, and the ingredients are all extremely fresh because they go from being picked to being delivered in under a week. But beyond all of that, I just really want to emphasize how good the food actually is. This week we got recipes for some bulgogi pork tenderloins with roasted carrots and lemon rice, as well as some Italian chicken and pepper sandwiches with some potatoes that, admittedly, I slightly modified the recipe for myself, and I roasted them with Kenji Lopez Alt's method instead of just doing normal wedges. And I just gotta say, these recipes are all amazing. If you feel like you're not a good cook, please do not worry about that. The instructions are very easy to follow. You will be able to make great food at home. You just have to trust yourself, try it out. It's very beginner friendly. I promise you will not regret it, especially once you taste the food. So if you want to try out HelloFresh for yourself and get better at cooking at home, you can go to HelloFresh.com and use promo code FilmRoom16 for 16 free meals and 3 extra free gifts across your first 7 boxes, plus free shipping on your order. Again, that is HelloFresh.com, promo code FilmRoom16 for 16 free meals across those first 7 boxes and free shipping on the order. Thank you again to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's show, and with that, let's get to number 4. Yes, I know I'm cheating by going with both of the Lions rookies here, Aiden Hutchinson and Josh Pascal, but I couldn't pick one without picking the other, so I just went with both. I had Hutchinson and Pascal both in my top 15 in my mock draft, so my grades on them were not really that far off from one another, and I think they complement each other really well. Pascal is better with his hand in the dirt, while Hutchinson, at least in my opinion, is better standing up as basically an outside linebacker rather than a true defensive end, which, even though that sounds like the Lions are going to have to be very rigid with them in terms of how they're used, they really won't have to be. Pascal, for instance, can play 6 technique in an even front and just line up and destroy tight ends, or if they want to play an odd front, they can kick him over to 5 technique and he'll be just fine there. He's definitely heavy and powerful enough to do that. While Hutchinson can play basically like a ghost 9 as a weak side edge in a 4-down front, or be a stand-up 7 over a tight end in an odd front. Honestly, whatever the Lions want to play, they can play, because both Pascal and Hutchinson are versatile enough to do it. For me, I see Pascal as the more explosive athlete, and like I said, he has better power, while Hutchinson is better at cornering and finishing rushes. For clarity's sake, I'm not necessarily saying that Hutchinson bends well, but he does corner well. They're two very different things. He has this weird ability to kind of be stiff as a board and very upright in his rush, and yet he can still get his hips and feet around to kind of flatten the edge and finish the rep and still get the sack. I don't really think I've ever seen that before, somebody who is relatively stiff but still gets around the corner quickly. It's not something I'm used to, but he absolutely qualifies as that, which is why I had him as a top 5 pick, because even though he's not the most gifted athlete, he still makes it work, and he's still really good, and at the end of the day, I think he's going to be successful in the league because of that. Pascal, meanwhile, again, has a much quicker first step, and he has more explosive pop in his hands on contact, so he's got the more traditional D-line tools that we look for, but he isn't quite the technician or the finisher that Hutchin is right now. To put it simply, in terms of ceiling, Pascal is higher in my opinion, but in terms of floor, Hutchinson is slightly higher himself. But either way, both of them will play and play often for Detroit, and I think that both of them are going to be really, really good. And this brings us to number 3, and a name that I think some people may be expected to be slightly higher on this list, but trust me, I have my reasons. But regardless, I'm still a big fan of him, and that is Kevon Thibodeau with the New York Giants. Thibodeau is a prospect that I've really struggled with because I am high on him. I did have a first round grade on him, but I maybe just wasn't as high on him as most other people. Full disclosure, I do see Boya Maefe as a better natural talent than Thibodeau, and the only reason that I basically had an equivalent overall grade on Maefe and Thibodeau before the draft is that Thibodeau has a longer history of high-level production, so his floor is higher, while Maafe's ceiling is higher on his end. But Thibodeau is still a good talent in his own right, and in my opinion is in a better situation for immediate production. What he brings to the table above everything else is speed to power. He is violent and explosive in everything he does. He's not as fluid or bendy as many other rushers in this class, but I wouldn't necessarily say he's stiff either. He's just very average in terms of bend. And so where he really makes his money is just going through people rather than sidestepping and bending around them. I think in New York, Wink Martindale is going to do everything in his power to present blitz looks that give Thibodeau one-on-ones with tight ends and running backs. which he was very good at doing when he was in Baltimore as their defensive coordinator, by the way. And if he does scheme those things up and give Thibodeau those desired matchups in protection, he's likely gonna fucking maul people and probably get a whole lot of pressure. He is way too quick and way too powerful for anyone but offensive tackles to handle, so just keep your eye on New York and how they use him, because I expect that he's going to be lining up at Sam against tight ends and just tearing them to shreds all year long. That now brings us to number 2 on this rookie edge rusher list, and I know this one also might be slightly controversial, but trust me, it is justified. I don't care what anybody says, Trayvon Walker was worth the first overall pick. I know that people just look at sack production and pass rush win rate and say that, oh, he's not a good pass rusher, why would you take him first overall? I think that really doesn't take into account how the Georgia defense actually functioned. If you watch my mock draft where I actually put him at first overall, you might remember this stat. But for those of you that didn't, if you look at Georgia's defense last year, if you look at 3rd and 5 plus situations, in terms of pass rush situations where there were no stunts involved and no blitzes involved, Trayvon Walker had 37 snaps the entire year of just being in a 4-man rush. They really did not just let him go get the quarterback. That was not something that Kirby Smart wanted to do. He was there to just stop the run, and then on 3rd down, he was going to be a contain rusher, or he was going to set up a stunt or a twist or anything like that. He was not going to be the star of the show. It doesn't mean that he wasn't the most talented guy there, because you could argue that he was, but they funneled a lot of their sack production into their linebackers. That was just how the defense functioned, and that's why Channing Tindall, who's a linebacker who played maybe half the snaps total, actually led them in sacks. Walker's one job was to just be a contain rusher and let the linebackers go hunt, and if the quarterback escaped those linebackers, he would then, kind of chase them out to the edge and finish the job. But he was not meant to just be the star pass rusher. In Jacksonville, they're actually going to let him off the leash a little bit and use his length and burst and power and everything else that he has in his toolbox to just go be a dominant rusher. Not to mention the fact that he's already an elite run defender, and even at 6'5", 270, he's pretty capable at dropping into coverage as well. That was something that Georgia happily did with him. So again, this is one of those picks where you really have to watch the film and not really trust the stats, because the stats are kind of misleading on him. He did go first overall for a reason, and it was a very good reason. And to this day, I will die on the hill that Trayvon Walker at first overall was the correct choice. But all that being said, I still didn't have Walker at the top of this list. And in fact, the number 1 rookie pass rusher on this list is somebody who didn't even go in the first round at all. If you know me and you've listened to basically any of my work for the last 6 months, I'd bet you could probably guess who it is. The fact that Arnold Ebbikini was a second-round pick does not mean that he was a second-round talent. I have talked to no fewer than 3 teams that all had first-round grades on him, just like I did, and all 3 of them were stunned that he was still there when he got taken by the Falcons. Looking at his testing numbers, he actually has a physical profile that historically is extremely hard to block. He's a little bit on the shorter side at 6'2", so he has better natural leverage, but his arm length is over 34 inches, which is more in line with somebody who's about 6'5". He's also 250 plus pounds, which really shows up when he's going speed to power on people. He's got plenty of mass to push people back, and his first step with a 38-inch vertical also translates pretty well. The key numbers, though, are the 169 10-yard split in his 40-yard dash, which again shows up in his really exceptional first step, and even more importantly than anything else, his sub-7 3-cone time, which for reference is 6.95, and historically, anybody who has a sub-7 3-cone is way more likely to be a good pass rusher in the league. So overall, he's shorter, so he has better leverage, but he still has the length of somebody who's a lot bigger. He's got plenty of size in terms of converting speed to power. He's got a great first step, and he's really fluid. The last guy that I can remember that had a similar profile to this, not exact match, but still pretty similar, is Justin Houston, who again was shorter, but still had length and power and tons of cornering ability. When you take that testing profile and then combine it with tape, where Ebbikini showed that he had a wide variety of pass rush moves, and he could win in basically any way he wanted to, whether it was speed to the outside or converting that speed to power and just going through people. He also had some really nice inside counters, and just in general, he was one of the most productive pass rushers in the country while playing in a major conference against top flight competition. At least for me, it's really hard to see a downside here. My only theory as to why he slipped to the second round is that he's a little bit older of a prospect. He actually got drafted when he was already 23, so maybe that contributed to him falling a little bit, but again, we're talking about testing profile, production, and tape grade all in one, and he aced all three components. I think that he's going to be the best edge rusher on the Falcons roster from day one. In fact, he's the best edge rusher right now. And when it's 3rd and 7 and he and Grady Jarrett are lined up right next to each other, and then you're showing blitz from the other side, so you have to kind of go one-on-one with Jarrett and ebbikini together, that's going to be really, really hard to block. So I think that Dean Pease is going to do an excellent job of giving him one-on-one matchups. He's going to win a lot of those one-on-one matchups. And by about 5 to 6 months from now, I think we're going to look back and wonder why Arnold Ebbikini went in the second round. All right, that'll wrap it up for today. Once again, thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this week's show. And if you guys are interested in supporting the channel by supporting my sponsors, and you want to check out their offer, once more, information is down in the description below. Next week's show is going to be all about the defensive tackle class, and there's a lot to go over there because that is a wildly underrated group in its own right, and I think there's going to be a lot of immediate impact players. So make sure to set your watches to come back next week, same time, same day. It's going to be a great show, and yeah, until then, cheers.